I told you a few hits were all it would take to make you docile, my son Tyrone said that morning, standing in the living room doorway, observing with satisfaction the impeccably clean house and the table set as if it were a holiday. He had returned barely 24 hours after beating me until I was left lying on the kitchen floor. There he stood, smiling with that arrogance that only men who believe they've won possess. The table was covered with the ivory-colored tablecloth I inherited from my mother. The good china gleamed under the morning light, and in the center, a pitcher of cool water with lemon slices seemed to welcome something important. Tyrone walked slowly, inhaling the aroma of freshly baked bread, convinced that his fists had achieved what his words never could: domesticate me. But when he discovered the real reason for that celebration, when he understood for whom that table was truly prepared, he was utterly paralyzed, because I wasn't celebrating his return. I was celebrating my freedom. It all began long before that last blow. It started 7 years ago, on a gray Tuesday in November, when Tyrone knocked on my door with 2 worn suitcases and a look that broke my heart. "It'll only be a few weeks, Mom," he'd said. And I, as always, opened my arms, and the door without asking questions. My son had lost his job. His wife had left him. He needed a place to get back on his feet, and I had this house, too big for a woman alone, too silent since I'd become a widow. I thought it would be temporary. I thought my love could heal him. I thought many things that turned out to be lies. I told myself to endure what was coming next. The first few weeks were tolerable. Tyrone slept late. He watched television. He ate what I cooked. He didn't look for work, but he didn't cause problems either. I justified his apathy by telling myself he was depressed, that he needed time. I washed his dishes, did his laundry, and when I asked him when he'd start job hunting, he would change the subject or slam the door and lock himself in his room. I learned not to ask. I learned to walk silently through my own house so as not to bother him. I learned that my life no longer belonged to me. The first yell came in the 3rd month. I had prepared chicken for dinner, but Tyrone wanted steak. "Can't you do anything right?" he bellowed, throwing the plate against the wall. The pieces of cream-colored ceramic scattered across the kitchen floor like small fragments of my dignity. I knelt to pick them up, apologizing, promising to make whatever he wanted. That night, as I bandaged my finger, which was cut by a shard of ceramic, I told myself it was my fault, that I should have asked him what he wanted to eat, that I needed to be more attentive, more careful. That is how the fall begins, justifying the unjustifiable. The screaming became daily. Tyrone complained about everything. The food was cold, too hot, or too salty. The house was dirty, even though I spent hours cleaning every corner. I made noise when he was trying to sleep. I didn't make enough noise when he wanted company. I spent too much on groceries. I didn't buy enough. Each day brought a new list of reproaches, and I, like a fool, tried to comply with all his impossible demands. I woke up at 5 in the morning to have breakfast ready by 7, even though he rarely got up before noon. I ironed his clothes, even though he never left the house. I cooked 3 different dinner options, just in case he disliked one of them. And still, it was never enough. After a year, Tyrone was no longer just shouting. He was pushing. A soft shove when I was in his way, a tug on my arm when I wasn't moving fast enough. Once he twisted my wrist because I took too long to pour his coffee. "It was an accident, Mom," he said, without looking me in the eye. And my God, I believed him, or wanted to believe him, because accepting the truth meant accepting that my only son, the baby I nursed, the child I hugged during his nightmares, had become my executioner. I stopped seeing my friends. Joyce called every week at first, inviting me for coffee or a walk in the park. But Tyrone always needed something just as I was about to leave. He was hungry or had a headache or simply looked at me with those eyes that said, "Don't you dare leave me alone." So I started turning down invitations, once, twice, 10 times, until Joyce stopped calling. The outside world shrank until it was just him and me in this house that smelled of resentment and reheated food. The neighbors noticed things. Mrs. Davis, who lived next door, once asked me why I had a bruise on my arm. I fell. I lied, pulling down the sleeve of my olive green blouse. She looked at me with that expression that says, "I know you're lying, but I won't press you." And I felt shame, not for the bruise, but for being such a coward, for allowing this to continue, for becoming a stranger to myself. Money was the next thing he controlled. My monthly Social Security and pension checks, which used to be perfectly adequate for me to live with dignity. But Tyrone had needs. He needed cigarettes. He needed beer. He needed money to look for work, even though I never saw a single job application. At first, I gave him $20 or $30 when he asked. Then it was $50, then $100, until one day he simply took my bank card and said, "It's easier this way, Mom. I manage the money better." And like an idiot, I gave it to him. I started asking his permission to buy my own medication, to buy food, to simply exist. My life was reduced to a series of routines designed to keep the peace. Waking up before him, preparing coffee exactly how he liked it, extra strong, 2 spoonfuls of sugar in the gray mug he inherited from his father, walking barefoot so as not to make noise, cooking without singing because my voice irritated him, watching television in my room with the volume so low I could barely hear it, breathing carefully, as if the simple act of existing could provoke his anger. And the saddest thing is that it worked. When I was invisible, when I became a shadow, he was calm. But even shadows have limits, and I was about to reach mine. The definitive breaking point came on a Thursday night. I had made vegetable soup because money was running out, and we only had about $300 left in the account until the end of the month. Tyrone walked into the kitchen, looked at the steaming bowl, and his face twisted into a grimace of disgust. "Soup again. Damn garbage soup." He spat the words out as if they were poison. I tried to explain that we needed to save, that expenses had been very high that month, that if he wanted, we could look for ways to reduce costs together. It was a mistake I would pay for with blood. Tyrone approached slowly, with that terrifying calm that preceded his worst moments. He took the bowl with both hands and flipped it onto the table. The hot soup spilled, staining the tablecloth, dripping to the floor, splashing my hands. I stayed motionless, feeling the liquid burning my skin. But more than the physical pain, it was the fear that paralyzed me. "You know what your problem is, Mom," he said, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. His breath smelled of stale beer and tobacco. "You never learned your place. Dad was too soft on you, but I won't be." What happened next occurred so fast that my brain took several seconds to process it. His hand slammed against my face with such force that I fell out of the chair. The cold tile floor hit my hip, my elbow, my shoulder. I felt a sharp pain in my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I only heard his voice above me, distant and close at the same time. "Get up, clean up this mess, and make something edible, you useless old woman." His heavy footsteps moved away toward the living room. The television turned on. Canned laughter from some sitcom filled the house as if nothing had happened. I stayed on the floor for several minutes. I didn't get up immediately because something inside me had broken. And it wasn't a bone. It was something deeper, more essential. It was the last drop of hope I held on to that this could get better, that Tyrone would be the boy I knew again. But that boy had died a long time ago, if he ever existed. The man living in my house was a stranger with my son's face and a tyrant's heart. With slow, painful movements, I dragged myself to sit up with my back against the counter. I touched my lip and my fingers were stained red. My cheek throbbed. I could feel it swelling, the skin tightening with the bruise already forming. But the worst wasn't the pain. The worst was the silence that followed. Tyrone was in the living room, laughing at the TV show while I bled on the kitchen floor. For him, this was normal. It was Thursday, it was dinner, it was his life. I cleaned up the spilled soup with trembling hands. Every movement was agony. Something in my side protested every time I bent down, every time I took too deep a breath. Probably a fractured rib, I thought. But I couldn't go to the hospital. What would I say? How would I explain this without admitting the truth? I scrubbed the floor until no trace of the soup remained. I washed the rag over and over under the cold water, and then I stood at the sink, looking at my distorted reflection in the dark window. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She had disheveled gray hair, sunken eyes, the stooped posture of someone who has spent too long bowing her head. When had I become this? When had I stopped being Florence and transformed into this frightened creature who existed only to serve and suffer? I didn't prepare another dinner that night. I simply crawled into my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. The house was silent. Tyrone had probably gone out to buy food with my money, with my card, with my life. I carefully touched my swollen face, and this time I finally cried. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of helplessness, of shame for having let myself get here. At 3 a.m, Tyrone returned. I heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway, the bang of his door closing. Then silence. I stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling, feeling every painful pulse in my face, my ribs, my soul. And it was in that darkness, in that silence broken only by the clock ticking on my dresser, that something changed. It wasn't a dramatic thought or a sudden revelation. It was simpler and deeper than that. It was the cold, clear certainty that if this continued, Tyrone would kill me. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually one of his blows would be too strong, too accurate, and I would stop breathing on the floor of my own kitchen while he watched television in the living room. I couldn't let that happen. Not like this. Not after surviving 63 years of life, after burying a husband, raising a son, enduring losses and joys. I wasn't going to die like a coward at the hands of my own child. If I was going to die, it would be on my own terms, but preferably, I wouldn't die at all. I would live, and to live, I needed to get out of here. The decision didn't bring peace, but it brought clarity, and clarity, I discovered, was almost as valuable as courage. I got out of bed as the sun began to timidly filter through the window, casting golden lines on the hardwood floor. My body protested with every movement, but I forced myself to walk to the small desk in the corner of my room. I opened the bottom drawer, the one I always kept locked, and pulled out an old brown notebook. It was my expense journal, where I meticulously recorded every penny that entered and left the house. But tucked between those pages was something else. A yellowed envelope with $300 that I had been saving for years, hidden from Tyrone. My only secret, my only emergency reserve. I counted the bills with trembling fingers. $300. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. I also found a folded paper, a card that Mrs. Davis had given me months ago when she was still trying to help me. On the card was the name of Eloise Robinson, social worker, with a phone number and an address. "In case you ever need to talk to someone," Mrs. Davis had said, squeezing my hand tightly. I had kept the card, promising myself I would never use it, that things weren't that bad, that I could handle the situation alone. How stupid I had been. I put the envelope with the money in the inner pocket of my robe and hid the card in my bra, pressed against my skin. I needed to keep these things close, invisible, secure. Then I looked at myself in the small mirror above the desk. My face was a map of violence, my lips split, my cheek dark purple, one eye slightly closed from the swelling. I couldn't go out like this. People would ask questions. Tyrone would find out. I needed to wait, heal enough to be able to move without raising suspicion. The following days were a careful performance. I became the perfect shadow, the submissive mother Tyrone believed he had created with his fists. I got up every morning before him. I prepared his coffee exactly as he liked it, served his meals without a word. I cleaned every corner of the house with silent movements. When he looked at me, I lowered my gaze. When he spoke, I nodded. When he yelled, I flinched. I gave him exactly what he wanted to see, a broken, defeated, tamed woman. But inside, behind my tired eyes and stooped posture, something completely different was growing. It was coldness. It was determination. It was the version of myself that had been asleep for 7 years and had finally woken up. Tyrone was satisfied with my transformation. "See, Mom, it wasn't that hard," he said on Sunday morning, sitting in his chair while I served him scrambled eggs and bacon. "You just needed to learn who's in charge here. Now everything is much easier, right?" I nodded. I kept my head down and he smiled. That smile of victory sickened me, but it also gave me strength because while he thought he had broken me, I was planning every detail of my escape. On Monday, when Tyrone left to meet some friends, leaving me locked in with specific orders to have dinner ready by 8, I picked up the phone with trembling hands. I dialed the number on the card Mrs. Davis had given me. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. I almost convinced myself that this was a bad idea, that I could handle it alone, that things would get better. But then a warm voice answered on the other end, from social services. "This is Eloise Robinson." And something inside me crumbled. I couldn't speak right away. My throat closed up. The words were stuck behind years of silence and shame. "Hello, is anyone there?" Eloise asked gently. "Yes," I finally managed to whisper. "I need help." Those 3 words were the hardest I had ever spoken in my life. Admitting I needed help meant admitting I had failed, that I couldn't solve this alone, that I was a victim. But Eloise didn't judge me. She didn't ask why it had taken me so long. She just said, "I'm here to listen. Take your time." I told her everything. The words flowed out like water from a broken dam. The beatings, the insults, the money control, the isolation, the 7 years of horror I had been living. As I spoke, I paced back and forth in my room, watching the window, terrified that Tyrone would return and discover me. Eloise listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her voice sounded firm and clear. "Florence, what you are experiencing is severe domestic violence. It is not your fault, and I can help you, but I need you to trust me. Can you come to my office?" I looked at the clock. Tyrone wouldn't be back until late. "I can be there in 40 minutes, I replied. I left the house for the first time in months without Tyrone's permission. Every step I took down the street felt like a betrayal and a liberation at the same time. The afternoon sun warmed my skin. I wasn't used to being outside, to walking freely. Eloise's office was in a beige building 6 blocks away. When I entered, a woman in her 50s with glasses and hair pulled back in a braid greeted me with a smile that held no pity, only understanding. "Florence," she said, as if she had known me all my life. "Please come in." Her office was small but cozy. There were plants in the windows, landscape photographs on the cream-colored walls, and a coffee maker that exuded a comforting aroma. I sat in a chair across from her desk, and Eloise sat next to me, not behind the desk, but beside me, like an equal. "First, I want you to know something important," she began, looking me directly in the eyes. "What is happening to you is not normal. It's not acceptable, and it is definitely not your fault. Sons do not have the right to beat their mothers. No one has that right." Hearing those words spoken aloud by another person made me cry. Not silent tears this time, but deep sobs that shook my entire body. Eloise passed me a box of tissues and waited. She didn't try to calm me or tell me to stop crying. She just waited until I could breathe again. "I'm sorry," I murmured, wiping my face. "Don't apologize for that," she said firmly. "You've been strong for too long. It's okay to break down now. You are in a safe place." Eloise pulled out a folder and began asking me specific questions. How long had Tyrone been living with me? How often did the violent episodes occur? Did I have any proof? Photographs of injuries, messages, witnesses? I shook my head, ashamed. I hadn't documented anything. I had hidden the bruises. I had lied about the falls. I had kept everything a secret. "That's okay," Eloise said, jotting something down in her notebook. "We will start from now. I'm going to take pictures of your current injuries. Do I have your permission?" I nodded. The photographs were humiliating. I had to show my swollen face from different angles, lift my blouse to show the bruises on my ribs, and extend my arms to capture the finger marks where Tyrone had gripped me tightly days before. Each click of the camera was evidence of my shame, but also evidence of his guilt. When we finished, Eloise put the camera away and took my hands. "This is very brave, Florence. I know it doesn't feel like it, but it is." We talked for almost 2 hours. Eloise explained my options. I could apply for a restraining order, file criminal charges, or seek refuge in a domestic violence shelter. But when she mentioned the shelter, something in me resisted. "No," I said, with a firmness that surprised me. "This is my house. My husband and I bought it 30 years ago. We paid every penny. I buried my husband from this house. I'm not going to let Tyrone drive me out of my own home." Eloise smiled, and for the first time I saw pride in her eyes. "Then we'll do this another way," she said. She told me about an attorney who worked with domestic violence cases, a man named Sterling Jones, who could help me regain legal control of my property, my money, and my life. "He works with us frequently," Eloise explained. "He's good at what he does and doesn't charge for the initial consultation. Do you want me to call him now?" I nodded, feeling something akin to hope beginning to grow in my chest. Sterling arrived 30 minutes later. He was a man in his 40s in a dark gray suit with a serious but kind expression. He sat down, opened his briefcase, and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Everhart, based on what Eloise told me over the phone, you have a solid case. Your son is living on your property without paying rent. He is physically and emotionally assaulting you, and he is controlling your finances. We can work on multiple fronts: a protective order, legal eviction, and regaining control of your bank accounts. But I need to know, are you ready to do this? Because once we start, there's no turning back." I looked at Sterling, then at Eloise, and then at my own hands, wrinkled and marked by years of labor. I thought of Tyrone, of his satisfied smile when he thought he had tamed me. I thought of all the years I had lost being his servant, his victim, his possession. And I thought of the woman I used to be, the Florence who laughed, who sang while she cooked, who had friends and dreams. "I'm ready," I said, and this time, my voice did not tremble. Sterling pulled several documents from his briefcase and spread them on Eloise's desk. "First things first," he said, pointing to a light yellow form. "We need to apply for a temporary protective order. With the photos Eloise took and your testimony, a judge can issue it in 24 to 48 hours. That will prohibit Tyrone from coming near you, contacting you, or remaining on your property." I listened to every word as if it were a foreign language. For so long, I had believed I had no options, that I was trapped, and now this man was telling me that the law could protect me. "What if he doesn't obey the order?" I asked, feeling fear tighten my throat. "What if he gets angry and things get worse?" Sterling looked at me seriously. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Everhart. There is risk. The most dangerous times in domestic violence situations are when the victim tries to leave or take control. That's why we need to plan this carefully. Eloise and I have worked together on dozens of cases like yours. We know how to do this safely." Eloise nodded and added, "You're not alone in this. You'll have support every step of the way." We spent the next few hours building a plan. Sterling explained that first, we would file the petition for the protective order at the courthouse. While we waited for the hearing, I needed to regain control of my finances. "Do you have access to your bank statements?" he asked. I shook my head. "Tyrone took everything, my card, my checkbook, even the statements that came in the mail." "Then tomorrow we go to the bank," Sterling said, writing something in his notebook. "You are the account holder. You have the right to cancel any additional cards, change passwords, and stipulate that only you can authorize transactions." The idea of facing the bank, of taking those concrete actions, terrified and thrilled me at the same time. "What if Tyrone finds out before we're ready?" I whispered. "What if he checks the account and sees that I canceled his card?" Sterling closed his notebook and looked directly at me. "That's why we need to move fast. Once we make the banking move, we have to be prepared to execute the rest of the plan immediately. We can't give him time to react." Eloise leaned forward and took my hand. "Florence, I know it's terrifying, but every day you spend living with him is one more day of risk. You've already made the hardest decision by coming here. Now you just need to keep going." I left that office 3 hours after I had entered, with a folder full of documents, a list of steps to follow, and something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. The sun was setting, staining the sky in orange and pink. I walked quickly back home, aware that Tyrone expected his dinner by 8, and it was already 7:15. My ribs still ached with every hurried step, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the mixture of terror and determination burning in my chest. I arrived home at 7:30. Tyrone was in the living room watching a football game with his feet on the coffee table and a can of beer in his hand. "You took a long time getting to the store," he said, without turning to look at me. My heart stopped. He had seen me leave. He knew where I had been. "The line was long," I lied, keeping my voice calm as I walked toward the kitchen. "I'm going to make dinner now." He grunted something unintelligible and returned his attention to the television. I let out a silent sigh of relief. That night, as I prepared roasted chicken and potatoes, my hands moved automatically, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I went over the plan again and again. Tomorrow, Tuesday, go to the bank at 9 in the morning when they opened. Sterling would meet me there. We would cancel Tyrone's card. We would change all the access. We would establish that only I could authorize transactions. Then we would go straight to the courthouse to file the protective order petition. If all went well, by Wednesday or Thursday, we would have the temporary order, and then would come the hardest part: notifying Tyrone that he had to leave my house. I served dinner in silence. Tyrone ate without saying a word, focused on his phone, texting, and occasionally laughing. I barely tasted my food. My stomach was knotted with nerves. Every time he moved, I tensed, waiting for another explosion, another blow, another humiliation. But that night, he was in a good mood. "I won $50 betting on the game," he informed me. "We're going to eat good tomorrow. I want a good steak. Go to the market early and buy the best cut you can find." I nodded, knowing that tomorrow there would be no market, no steak, and if all went according to plan, no more orders. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my bed, watching the shadows the streetlights cast on the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, the refrigerator humming, the occasional creak of the beams, Tyrone snoring across the hall. I thought about everything that could go wrong. What if the bank refused to help me? What if the judge didn't believe my story? What if Tyrone found out what I was planning before we could execute it? The possibilities of failure were endless, and each one terrified me more than the last. But then I remembered Eloise's words. "You've already made the hardest decision." She was right. The hardest part wasn't what came next, but daring to take the first step. And I had already taken it. I had already left the house without permission. I had already talked to strangers about my situation. I had already admitted the truth. I couldn't go back now, even if I wanted to. The process was already in motion. At 5 in the morning, I got up, even though I hadn't slept at all. I showered with warm water, letting the heat relax my tense muscles. I dressed carefully, dark gray slacks, a peach-colored blouse, comfortable shoes. I wanted to look respectable, like the homeowner I was, not the victim I had become. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The bruises were fading, changing from purple to a greenish yellow, but they were still visible. Good, I thought. Let the judge see them. Let the world see what Tyrone has done to me. I made coffee for Tyrone, as always. I placed his mug on the kitchen table along with toast and jam. I wrote a note. Went to the market early to get the best steak. Back soon. It was a lie, of course, but I needed time. I needed him not to suspect anything until it was too late for him to stop me. I took my purse, tucked the folder of documents Sterling had given me inside, and left the house at 6:30 in the morning. The streets were almost empty at that hour. The fresh morning air filled my lungs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something akin to freedom. I walked to a coffee shop that opened early, 3 blocks from my house, and sat by the window with a cup of hot coffee in my hands. I had 2.5 hours before meeting Sterling at the bank. 2.5 hours to mentally prepare myself for what was coming. 2.5 hours to be brave. Sterling arrived at the bank at exactly 9 o'clock, his briefcase in one hand and an expression of determination on his face. "Good morning, Mrs. Everhart," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Ready for this?" I nodded, even though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We walked into the bank together, and Sterling spoke to one of the managers, explaining the situation professionally but directly. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a private office, and a woman named Patricia was reviewing my accounts on her computer. "I see there is an additional card associated with your account," Patricia said, looking at the screen. "Issued 6 years ago in the name of Tyrone Everhart." I nodded. "I need to cancel it now." Patricia didn't ask questions. She had seen enough cases like mine to understand. "Of course. I'm also going to change your PIN, your online banking passwords, and place an alert on your account so that no one but you can authorize changes. Does that sound right?" "Perfect," I said, feeling a weight begin to lift from my shoulders. When we left the bank 30 minutes later, I had a new bank card in my purse, new passwords memorized, and for the first time in 6 years, total control over my own money. Sterling walked beside me with a steady pace as we headed to the courthouse, which was just 2 blocks away. "You did very well in there," he said, and something in his tone made me proud of myself. I had been strong. I had spoken clearly. I hadn't cried or apologized for taking what was rightfully mine. The courthouse was an imposing concrete building with tall columns and hallways that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. Sterling guided me through the entrance, past metal detectors and security guards, until we reached an office on the 3rd floor with a sign that read, "Domestic Violence and Protective Orders." A receptionist handed us forms to fill out. I sat in a hard plastic chair and began to write my story in the blanks, reducing 7 years of horror to marked boxes and brief descriptions. When did the last incident occur? Last Thursday. Describe the nature of the aggression. Blows to the face and torso. Have there been previous threats? Yes, constantly for 7 years. Sterling reviewed each form before I submitted it, making sure it was complete and correct. When we finished, we sat down to wait. The waiting room was filled with women of all ages, some with small children quietly playing with worn toys, others alone with blank expressions that I recognized in myself. We were all here for the same reason. We had all reached the point where survival was more important than maintaining appearances, more important than love, more important than anything else. A young woman sitting next to me had a sleeping baby in her arms and one eye completely swollen. Our eyes met for a second, and in that second, we shared everything: the fear, the shame, the determination, the hope. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. At 11:20, an assistant called my name. Sterling and I entered a small office where a judge in her 60s, with short silver hair and glasses, reviewed my file. "Mrs. Florence Everhart," she said without looking up, "I have reviewed your petition and the attached photographs. I will grant an emergency temporary protective order, valid for 15 days. During that time, a formal hearing will be scheduled where your son may present his version, and I will decide whether the order should be made permanent." My heart skipped a beat. 15 days. It seemed like such a short time, and at the same time, an eternity. The judge continued, "This order stipulates that Mr. Tyrone Everhart is prohibited from approaching you within 500 feet, contacting you by any means, and must immediately vacate the property located at the address you provided. Law enforcement can enforce this order. If he violates it, he will be arrested." She signed the document in black ink, stamped an official seal, and handed me a copy. "Take this seriously, madam. If he contacts you, call the police immediately. Do not negotiate. Do not talk to him. Do not give him opportunities. Your safety comes first." We left the courthouse with the protective order in hand, and Sterling drove me directly to the police station. "We need an officer to go with you to your house to serve the notice to Tyrone and supervise while he gathers his belongings and leaves," he explained. At the station, an officer named Wallace, a hefty man about 35 with a serious expression, read the order and nodded. "These cases are sensitive," he said, looking directly at me. "I will take you to your house. We will notify your son, and he will have 1 hour to collect his essential belongings and leave. If he refuses, we will arrest him for contempt. If he becomes violent, we will arrest him for assault. You don't have to speak to him at all. I will handle it." The journey back to my house was surreal. I was in the back seat of a patrol car with Sterling following in his own vehicle, and Officer Wallace driving in silence. I looked out the window at the familiar streets, the houses where I had lived for 30 years, and everything seemed different. Now I wasn't fleeing. I was returning. But this time, I was returning as the owner, not the prisoner. When we arrived at my house, I saw Tyrone's car parked in the driveway. He was home. My stomach twisted into a knot of panic. Officer Wallace must have noticed because he said firmly, "Breathe. I've got this. You just need to stay behind me and don't say anything unless I ask you directly." Sterling walked up and put a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Florence. In a few minutes, this will be over." We walked to the front door. I pulled out my keys with trembling hands and opened it. The television was blaring. Tyrone was on the sofa, exactly where I had left him so many times, with his feet on the coffee table and a beer can in his hand. When he saw us enter, his expression changed from confusion to rage in a second. "What the hell is this?" he roared, standing up. "Why did you bring the police to my house?" "This is not your house, sir," Officer Wallace said in a calm but authoritative voice. "This property belongs to Mrs. Florence Everhart, and I have here a protective order prohibiting you from remaining on these premises." He held out the document toward Tyrone. Tyrone snatched it rudely, his eyes quickly scanning the lines, and then he looked at me with an expression that chilled my blood. It was pure hatred. "You did this?" he asked in a dangerously low voice. "You betrayed me like this, you miserable old woman?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to explain. I wanted to scream about all the years of pain he had caused me. But Officer Wallace stepped between us. "Mr. Everhart, you have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate the property. If you attempt to contact, intimidate, or approach Mrs. Everhart, you will be immediately arrested. Do you understand?" Tyrone clenched his jaw, crumpled the paper in his fist, and for a moment I thought he was going to attack us. But the presence of the uniformed officer, his hand near the belt where his pistol hung, was enough to stop him. "Fine," he finally said, his voice laced with venom. "I'm leaving this dump," he added. "But this isn't over, Mom. This isn't over." Officer Wallace took a step forward. "That sounded like a threat, Mr. Everhart. I suggest you choose your words more carefully." Tyrone didn't respond. He simply turned on his heel and stomped up the stairs to his room with heavy steps that shook the whole house. Sterling guided me to the kitchen while Tyrone collected his things upstairs. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Breathe. It's almost done." But I couldn't sit. I was shaking from head to toe, adrenaline surging through my veins like electricity. I could hear Tyrone moving things, opening drawers, cursing. Every noise made me jump. Officer Wallace stood at the foot of the stairs, watching with an expression that left no room for negotiation. 20 minutes later, Tyrone came down with 2 large suitcases and a backpack. His face was red with fury, the veins in his neck bulging. He walked past me without looking, but I felt his hatred as something physical, tangible. He dropped the suitcases next to the door with a loud thud and turned back to the officer. "Can I leave now, or are you going to arrest me for breathing too?" Officer Wallace didn't take the bait. "You may leave. And remember, 500 feet distance from Mrs. Everhart at all times, 0 contact. If I see you monitoring this house, if you call her, if you send someone to speak to her, we will be back with handcuffs." Tyrone grabbed his suitcases and walked out the door without another word. I heard his car start, the squeal of the tires as he sped out of the driveway, the sound of the engine fading down the street. And then, silence. A silence so complete, so profound, that for a moment, I didn't know what to do with it. Officer Wallace closed and locked the front door. "He's gone," he said. "You're safe." Safe. I didn't know. My legs gave out, and I had to grab the back of a chair. to keep from falling. Sterling held my arm. "Sit down, Florence. It's over now. It's done." But it didn't feel over. It felt like it was just beginning. Officer Wallace stayed 20 more minutes, checking all the locks in the house, making sure the windows were tightly closed, and explaining the next steps if Tyrone attempted to return. "Keep your phone charged and close by at all times," he said, handing me a card with the direct number to the station. "If he shows up, if you see him nearby, if you receive any kind of contact, call immediately. Don't wait, don't hesitate, don't think you're overreacting. These cases can escalate quickly." I nodded, putting the card in my blouse pocket. Sterling added his own phone number on a piece of paper. "I'm available 24 hours too. Anything, Florence, whatever it is, you call me." When they finally left, I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by a silence that was entirely mine for the first time in 7 years. The house felt strange, like a new place, even though every piece of furniture, every crack in the wall, every stain on the carpet was as familiar as my own skin. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the surfaces, reclaiming my own space. In the kitchen, Tyrone's plate was still in the sink with dried food remnants. I picked it up and for an instant instinctively considered washing it, but then something inside me resisted. I dropped it into the trash can. I wasn't going to clean up his messes anymore, ever. I went upstairs to his room, the guest room before he arrived, and turned it into his personal fortress. The door was open, and the disorder was monumental. Dirty clothes piled in the corners, empty beer bottles on the floor, plates with half-eaten food on the desk. The smell was nauseating, a mixture of sweat, tobacco, and neglect. He had left many things, posters on the walls, boxes of personal items, a broken lamp, but I didn't care. All that could wait. I closed the door and decided that room would only exist to me when I was ready to face it. That first night alone was the strangest of my life. I prepared a simple dinner for myself, just for myself, vegetable soup and toast. I sat at the kitchen table without watching the time, without calculating when he would arrive, without planning what I would say if he didn't like the food. I ate slowly, savoring every spoonful, and it was the first meal in years that I could digest without my stomach tightening from fear. Afterward, I washed my plate, only my plate, and left everything clean. I turned off the lights, checked the doors twice, and went up to my room. I lay in bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. The wind hitting a window, the creaking of the beams, the engine of a car passing by on the street. My heart pounded, expecting to hear his heavy footsteps, his key in the lock, his voice roaring my name. But he didn't come. The hours passed slowly, marked by the clock on my nightstand. 11, midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. And little by little, as the silence stretched, unbroken, something inside me began to relax. I was alone, truly alone, and for the first time in so long, that wasn't scary. It was peaceful. The following days were an exercise in relearning how to live. I woke up without alarms, made coffee just for me, ate breakfast when I was hungry, not when someone else ordered it. I cleaned the house at my own pace without rush, without panic. I opened the curtains and let the sunlight in. I put on music, something I hadn't done in years because the noise bothered Tyrone. I sang while I cooked. My voice sounded rusty, out of tune from disuse, but I didn't care. It was my voice in my house, and no one could silence me. Eloise called me every day during that first week. "How are you? Have you heard from him? Do you feel safe?" Her questions were professional but genuine. I told her about my days, about the small acts of freedom I was rediscovering. Sleeping late, eating ice cream straight from the container at midnight, watching TV shows that I chose. "That's good," she would say. "You're rebuilding yourself. Take your time. There's no rush." Sterling also called, keeping me informed about the legal process. The formal hearing for the permanent protective order was scheduled for 10 days from now. Tyrone had been officially served. He would have the opportunity to show up and give his version. "Do I have to see him?" I asked, feeling panic tighten my throat. "You will have to be in the same room," Sterling explained. "But there will be security. He won't be able to approach you. I will be with you the whole time. Eloise will be there too. You are not alone in this." Those words had become a mantra. You are not alone. After 7 years of isolation, of believing I had no one, of thinking I had to bear everything in silence, discovering there were people willing to help me was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. On the 5th day after Tyrone left, I dared to leave the house. Not to run necessary errands, but just to walk. I put on a lavender dress I hadn't worn in years. I brushed my hair and left it down, and I stepped out onto the street in the afternoon sun. I walked through my neighborhood as if seeing it for the first time. I greeted Mrs. Davis, who was watering her garden plants. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Florence, what a pleasure to see you. You look different." "I feel different," I replied. And it was true. Something in my posture had changed. I no longer walked hunched over with my gaze down. I walked with my head held high. Mrs. Davis put down the hose and approached the fence separating our houses. "I heard your son left," she said carefully, without judgment. I nodded. "He left, and he's not coming back." She smiled, a small but meaningful smile. "I'm glad, Florence. I'm so glad. If you ever need company or just want to have a cup of coffee, my door is always open." For the first time in years, I accepted the invitation. "I would love that. Tomorrow, does that work for you?" "Perfect," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. That night, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a car stop in front of my house. My heart froze. I ran to the living room window and carefully peeked through the curtains. It was an unfamiliar car, black with tinted windows. It stayed there with the engine running for what seemed like hours, but was probably only 2 minutes. Then it drove away. I stood there trembling with the phone in my hand, ready to call the police. Was it Tyrone? Someone he had sent? Or just a neighbor visiting someone on the street? I didn't know, but the fear returned, raw and paralyzing, reminding me that even though Tyrone no longer lived here, his shadow still stretched over my life. I called Sterling. He answered on the second ring. "Florence, what happened?" I told him about the car. He listened without interrupting and then said, "Did you see anyone inside? Did the car do anything threatening?" "No," I admitted. "It just sat there." "It's okay," he said calmly. "It's normal to be hypersensitive after what you've been through. It might have been nothing, but you did the right thing by calling me. If it happens again, write down the license plate and call the police. They can check it out. And Florence, breathe. Are you secure? The doors are locked. You have the emergency numbers. You are not defenseless." His words helped calm me down. He was right. I was no longer the defenseless woman Tyrone had tried to create. I had taken action, sought help, had a protective order, allies, resources. If he tried anything, I wouldn't stay silent. I wouldn't hide. I would fight. That night, I slept with the phone on the nightstand and a baseball bat I found in the garage underneath the bed. I would probably never use it, but knowing it was there gave me a sense of control. The days kept passing. I reconnected with Joyce, my old friend who had stopped calling after so many rejections. When I dialed her number, after years of silence, my voice shook. "Joyce, it's Florence!" There was a pause, and then her warm, surprised voice. "Florence, my God, how are you? It's been so long." "I know," I said, feeling tears burn my eyes. "I'm so sorry. I've had problems, but I'm better now. And I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee with me sometime." We agreed to meet on Saturday. When the day arrived, I was nervous, like a teenager on her first date. I got ready carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel like myself, not the shadow I had become. Joyce hugged me when we met at the coffee shop, a long, strong hug that made me cry. "I missed you," she whispered. "Me too," I replied. I didn't tell her everything that day. It was too much, too soon, but I told her enough, that Tyrone no longer lived with me, that I was reclaiming my life, that I needed to reconnect with the people who mattered to me. She listened, took my hand across the table, and said, "I'm here for whatever you need, always." The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 in the morning. The night before, I could barely close my eyes. I stayed awake, mentally reviewing what I would say, how I would behave. What would I do if Tyrone tried to intimidate me with his eyes or words? Sterling had prepared me. The judge will ask you questions about the incidents of violence. Answer honestly, calmly. Don't let yourself be provoked if Tyrone or his lawyer try to make you angry. Maintain your composure. The truth is on your side. But knowing what to do and being able to do it were two completely different things. I got up at dawn, showered with almost cold water to wake myself up completely, and dressed in the most formal suit I owned, charcoal gray slacks and a cream-colored blouse. I wanted to look serious, respectable, like someone whose words deserved to be heard. I applied light makeup to cover the last shadows of the bruises still lingering on my cheek, though part of me wanted to leave them visible. I wanted the judge to see exactly what Tyrone had done to me. But Sterling had said the photographs would be sufficient evidence. "You don't need to display your wounds to be believed," he had explained. "Your testimony and the evidence speak for themselves." Sterling picked me up at 8:30. Eloise was waiting for us in the courthouse parking lot. When the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. There were more people than I expected. Other women waiting for their own hearings, lawyers reviewing documents, security officers standing in the corners. And then I saw him. Tyrone was at the end of the hallway, sitting on a wooden bench, dressed in a white shirt and dark pants, as if it were a job interview. Next to him was an older man in a black suit who must have been his lawyer. When our eyes met, I felt a shiver run down my spine. His expression showed no anger. It showed cold, calculated contempt, as if I were an insignificant nuisance that would soon be eliminated. Sterling put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't look at him. Focus on me. He can't do anything to you here." Eloise positioned herself on my other side, creating a protective barrier. We sat on the opposite bench, as far away from Tyrone as possible. The minutes dragged on like hours. At 10 o'clock, an assistant opened the courtroom doors and began calling names. Case number 4732, Florence Everhart versus Tyrone Everhart. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The room was smaller than I had imagined. There was a table for each party, a witness chair, and at the front, elevated on a platform, the judge's bench. The same woman who had signed my temporary order was there, reviewing papers with a serious expression. Sterling guided me to our table. Tyrone and his lawyer sat at the opposite table, less than 10 feet away. I could feel his presence as something physical, oppressive, but I forced myself to look straight ahead, to breathe, to remember why I was here. The judge looked up. "Good morning. This is the hearing to determine whether the temporary protective order issued on the 18th of this month should be made permanent. I have reviewed the initial petition of Mrs. Florence Everhart, the photographs of the injuries, and the written testimony. Mr. Everhart, you have the right to present your version. But first, Mrs. Everhart, I would like to hear directly from you. Please approach the stand." My legs trembled as I stood up. Sterling gave my arm a gentle squeeze before letting go. I walked to the witness chair. I sat down and placed my hands in my lap to hide how they were shaking. The judge looked at me with a neutral, but not cold, expression. "Mrs. Everhart, tell me in your own words what led you to request this protective order." I took a deep breath. It was now or never. It was my opportunity to tell the truth, the whole truth, without fear of consequences. "Your Honor," I began, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. "My son Tyrone came to live with me 7 years ago when he lost his job. I took him in because he was my son, and I thought he needed temporary help. But what started as support turned into control. He never looked for work. He took control of my money, my house, my life. He would scream at me if the food wasn't exactly how he wanted it. He would push me if I moved too slowly. He constantly insulted me, calling me useless, old, and stupid. I stopped seeing my friends because he always needed something when I tried to go out. I stopped making decisions about my own life because I was afraid of his reaction. The judge listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. I continued, feeling the words flow more easily now that I had started. 2 weeks ago, I made soup for dinner because money was running out. He became enraged. He said it was garbage. He flipped the plate onto the table. When I tried to explain that we needed to save, he hit me. He hit me in the face so hard that I fell to the floor. Then he kicked me in the ribs while I was down, and then he went into the living room to watch television, as if nothing had happened. My voice cracked slightly, but I continued. That night I realized that if I didn't do something, he would eventually kill me. Not because he's a monster, but because he had learned that he could hit me without consequences. I had taught him that by allowing it for so long. Tyrone made a sound of disgust from his table. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, silencing him. The judge gave him a warning look before returning her attention to me. "Is there anything else you wish to add?" I thought for a moment. There was so much more. The years of psychological humiliation, the nights sleeping in fear, the loss of my identity. But I decided to end with something simple and direct. I just want to live in peace in my own house, Your Honor. I don't want revenge. I don't want to hurt him. I just want him to leave me alone. I returned to my seat. Sterling gave me an approving look. Now it was Tyrone's turn. The judge called him to the stand. He walked with confident steps, as if this were a minor inconvenience, and sat with a relaxed, almost arrogant posture. "Mr. Tyrone," the judge began, "you have heard your mother's testimony. What is your version of events?" Tyrone cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my mother is exaggerating everything. Yes, we had a disagreement about dinner. I was frustrated because she knows I don't like soup, and she keeps making it. I got upset. I admit I raised my voice, but I never hit her. She tripped and fell on her own. She's always been clumsy, especially at her age. I don't know how she got all those bruises. Maybe she hit something when she fell. I wasn't paying attention after the incident. I went into the living room. Rage boiled inside me, but I bit my tongue. Sterling had warned that Tyrone would probably lie, that he would deny everything or minimize his actions. The judge reviewed the photographs in front of her. "Mr. Tyrone, the injuries documented here are consistent with direct blows, not an accidental fall. A split lip, finger pattern bruises on the cheekbone, contusions on the ribs. Are you saying all of this was the result of a stumble?" Tyrone hesitated for the first time. "I don't know how she got all that. Maybe she hit something when she fell. I wasn't paying attention after the incident. I went into the living room." His lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, there are no witnesses to this alleged attack other than Mrs. Everhart. There are no contemporaneous medical reports of the incident. My client admits there was an argument that became heated, but he adamantly denies striking his mother. Furthermore, I would like to point out that he has lived in that house for years without any prior issue. Why, suddenly, after all this time, is she bringing these accusations? It's suspicious, Your Honor. It could be an attempt to evict him from the property for personal reasons unrelated to violence." Sterling immediately rose to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about my client's motivations without any basis. Furthermore, the absence of prior medical reports is precisely characteristic of domestic violence victims who live in silence out of fear, not evidence that the abuse didn't occur. And regarding the lack of witnesses, domestic violence, by its nature, occurs in private. That is precisely why it is so difficult to combat." The judge raised a hand. "Both of you, sit down. I understand the arguments of both parties." A silence fell as the judge reviewed the documents in front of her. I held my breath. This moment would decide everything, whether I could live in peace or if I would have to constantly look over my shoulder. Finally, the judge spoke. "I have carefully considered both testimonies, the photographic evidence, and typical patterns in domestic violence cases. Mrs. Everhart's injuries are extensive and consistent with physical assault. Mr. Tyrone's explanation that they were caused by an accidental fall is not credible, given the pattern and severity of the contusions. Furthermore, Mrs. Everhart's testimony describes a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior that spanned years, not an isolated incident. My heart was beating so fast I felt like I might faint. The judge continued, "Therefore, I order that the protective order be made permanent for a period of 3 years. Mr. Tyrone Everhart is prohibited from approaching within 500 feet of Mrs. Florence Everhart, contacting her by any means, or remaining on the property located at the mentioned address. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Additionally, I order Mr. Tyrone to attend an anger management program as a condition. This hearing is concluded." The judge's gavel struck, resonating in the room like a liberating clap of thunder. 3 years. I had 3 years of legal protection. 3 years to rebuild my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. Sterling leaned toward me and whispered, "You did it, Florence. You won." But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like survival, like having climbed a mountain, only to discover there's another one on the other side. Eloise hugged me when we left the courtroom. "I am so proud of you," she said, and her words made me cry the tears I had been holding back throughout the hearing. Tyrone left the room behind us, his face contorted in a mask of contained fury. For a moment, our eyes met in the hallway. In his eyes, I saw something that chilled me to the core. Not remorse, not shame, but a promise. The promise that this wasn't over for him, that he would find a way to make me pay for having humiliated him publicly. A security officer immediately approached, interposing himself between us. "Mr. Everhart, maintain your distance. The order is now in effect." Tyrone looked away, said something quietly to his lawyer, and headed toward the elevators without looking back. Sterling escorted me to his car. My legs could barely hold me up. The adrenaline that had kept me standing during the hearing finally dissipated, leaving me exhausted and shaking. "I want you to know something important," Sterling said as he drove back to my house. "What you did today took immense courage. Most people in your situation never take this step. They stay silent until it's too late. You saved yourself, Florence. Don't forget that." His words were etched into my mind like an invisible tattoo. When we arrived at my house, Sterling insisted on checking all the locks again, verifying that the windows were secure, and making sure I had all the emergency numbers programmed into my phone. "The first few days after an order like this are critical," he explained. "Tyrone is furious. He may try to contact you through other people. He may send messages from unknown numbers. He may try to emotionally manipulate you. Do not respond to anything. Any attempt at contact, no matter how minor it seems, report it immediately." I nodded, memorizing every instruction as if my life depended on it, because maybe it did. That night, I prepared a special dinner for myself. It was nothing elaborate, just pasta with homemade tomato sauce and salad. But I prepared it with intention, with self-love, celebrating the fact that I could now eat in peace. I set the table nicely with the tablecloth I liked, lit a candle, and poured myself a glass of wine that had been stored in the cupboard for years. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and for the first time in a long time, the food didn't taste like fear. It tasted like freedom. The following days were quieter than I expected. There were no strange cars in front of my house. There were no calls from unknown numbers. There were no signs of Tyrone. Part of me was relieved. Another part was uneasy, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew my son. I knew his temper. He wasn't the type of man to accept defeat gracefully. But maybe, just maybe, the legal intervention had been enough to scare him, to make him understand that his actions had real consequences. I started going out more. I reconnected with more friends from the past. Joyce invited me to her book club, a circle of women who met every 2 weeks to discuss books and drink tea. The first time I attended, I felt like an imposter, as if I didn't deserve to be there with these women who laughed freely and talked about their lives without shame. but they welcomed me warmly, without asking invasive questions, and little by little, I began to feel part of something bigger than my own tragedy. Mrs. Davis became a regular visitor. She would come 2 or 3 afternoons a week, bringing homemade cookies or fruit from her garden, and we would sit in my kitchen drinking coffee and chatting. We didn't always talk about deep things. Sometimes we just commented on the soap operas, the weather, or neighborhood gossip. But her constant presence reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about me without wanting anything in return. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the hearing, I was watering the plants in my garden when I saw a white envelope in my mailbox. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was an unsigned card with only 3 words written in cramped handwriting: "This isn't over." My blood ran cold. It was Tyrone's handwriting. I would recognize it anywhere. He had violated the protective order. I ran into the house, locked the door, and immediately called Sterling. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, accompanied by a police officer. They took photographs of the card, kept it as evidence, and filed a formal report. "This is a direct violation of the order," the officer explained. "We are going to issue an arrest warrant for him. Do you know where he might be living?" I shook my head. I had no idea where Tyrone had gone after leaving my house. I didn't have his new number. I didn't know who he was staying with. The officer wrote everything down in his notebook. "Stay alert. If you see him near your property, call 911 immediately. Do not attempt to confront him." I nodded, even though the idea of seeing Tyrone appear at my door filled me with paralyzing terror. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, the phone in one hand and the baseball bat in the other, waiting to hear footsteps on the porch, a window breaking, his voice yelling my name. But the night passed in silence. At dawn, exhausted and shaking, I finally allowed myself to close my eyes for a couple of hours. 2 days later, the police arrested Tyrone. They found him at a bar 6 blocks from my house, drunk and openly talking about how I had betrayed him, how he would make me pay. Someone in the bar, concerned about his erratic behavior, called the police. When the officers arrived and ran his name through the system, they discovered the outstanding arrest warrant. They handcuffed him right there, in front of all the bar patrons. Sterling called to give me the news. "He's detained, Florence. He'll spend at least 72 hours in custody while they process the charges for violating the protective order." The news should have relieved me, but I only felt a strange emptiness. This was my son, the baby I had carried in my arms, and now he was in a cell for threatening me. At what point had everything gone so terribly wrong? "It's not your fault," Sterling said, as if he could read my thoughts through the phone. "Tyrone made his own choices. You only protected yourself. Never forget that." 6 months passed since Tyrone's arrest. 6 months in which I learned to live again, to breathe without constant fear, to recognize my own reflection in the mirror. The house that had been my prison slowly transformed into my sanctuary. I painted the living room walls a soft peach color, a warm tone that reminded me of tranquil sunrises. I converted the room that had been Tyrone's into a small studio where I began to practice watercolor, a hobby I had abandoned decades ago. Every brushstroke on the canvas was an act of reclamation, a statement that my life belonged to me again. Tyrone was sentenced to 8 months in prison for violating the protective order and making threats. When he got out, the order would remain in effect for 2 more years. Sterling explained that he would probably try to appeal, that he might try to contact me again when he regained his freedom. But by then, he said with a small smile, "You will be even stronger than you are now." And he was right. With every day that passed without him, I regained another piece of myself that had been lost. One Thursday afternoon, exactly 7 months after the hearing, I decided to do something I had been putting off. I set the table, the same table Tyrone had seen when he returned the day after beating me. The same table that had confused him, that had made him believe his fists had tamed me. But this time, I set it for the right reasons. I invited Eloise, Sterling, Mrs. Davis, Joyce, and 3 other women from the book club. I prepared a hearty dinner: roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and for dessert, a chocolate cake I baked myself, following my mother's recipe. When they arrived, the house was filled with light, soft music, and the aroma of homemade food made with love. Sterling brought wine. Eloise arrived with bright yellow fresh flowers. Joyce hugged me in the doorway and whispered, "Look at everything you've built." And it was true. I had built something beautiful on the ruins of my pain. We sat around that table, the same one that had witnessed so much violence, and filled it with laughter, stories, and celebration. We weren't celebrating Tyrone's downfall. We were celebrating my resurrection. During dinner, Sterling raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to Florence," he said, and everyone fell silent. 7 months ago, I met a woman who had been beaten, controlled, and stripped of her dignity. But that woman found the courage to stand up, to seek help, to say, "Enough." And today, I look around and I see that same woman, but transformed. I see someone who not only survived, but is flourishing. Florence, you are an example that it is never too late to reclaim your life. To you. Everyone raised their glasses. "To Florence," they said in unison. I had to wipe my tears with my napkin. Eloise shared something afterward. "I've worked with domestic violence victims for 15 years, she said, "and I've seen everything. Women who go back to their abusers again and again, women who don't survive to tell the tale, women who manage to escape but are broken forever. But I've also seen women like you, Florence, women who turn their trauma into strength, who don't let the violence define who they are. You chose to live, you chose to fight, and you chose to heal. That is extraordinary." Her words resonated with me profoundly. I had chosen it every step of the way. From that first phone call to this very moment, I had made active decisions to save myself. That night, after everyone left, I stayed alone in my kitchen, washing dishes with my hands submerged in warm, soapy water. I looked out the window at the dark garden and thought about the entire journey. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who allowed herself to be beaten and controlled because she believed she didn't deserve anything better. I thought about the woman I was now, the one who had friends, projects, and hope. They were not the same person. I had died on that kitchen floor 7 months ago, and I had been reborn stronger. Tyrone would eventually get out of prison. He would probably still be the violent and resentful man he had always been, but that was no longer my problem. I had done my part. I had set boundaries. I had sought legal protection. I had built a support network. If he chose to change, good for him. If not, that was his cross to bear, not mine. I was no longer responsible for saving him or enduring him. My only responsibility was to myself. The following months continued to bring small victories. I fully regained control of my finances and discovered that Tyrone had spent nearly $5,000 of my savings during the years he lived with me. Sterling helped me file a civil lawsuit to recover some of that money. I would probably never see a dime, but the very act of reclaiming what was mine had value. I enrolled in senior yoga classes at the community center. I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping other women navigate the same process I had gone through. Sharing my story, seeing how it gave hope to others, healed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. A year after everything, on a sunny spring afternoon, I was sitting in my garden painting wildflowers when Mrs. Davis leaned over the fence. "Florence, you have a visitor," she said. My heart raced for a moment of instinctive panic, but Mrs. Davis smiled. "It's Eloise." Eloise walked into the garden with a folder under her arm. "I came to give you something," she said, sitting in the chair next to me. She opened the folder and took out a certificate. "You officially completed the Survivor Recovery Program. This is for you." It was a simple piece of paper, but it meant everything. It meant I had done the work. I had attended therapy. I had processed my trauma. I had learned tools to never return to that dark place. "Do you know what the most incredible thing about you is?" Eloise asked, looking at me with shining eyes. "That you're 64 years old, and you still had the courage to start over. Many people your age think it's too late to change, to get out of bad situations, but you proved that it's never too late. I smiled, feeling the warm sun on my face. "It's never too late to choose to live," I replied. "That's what I learned. As long as you breathe, as long as you have a voice, you can choose something different." That night, I stayed up later than usual, sitting on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea, looking at the stars. I thought of Tyrone, wherever he was. I wished him peace genuinely, not because he deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of resentment. He had been the villain of my story, but I had chosen to be the hero of my own rescue. And that choice, that decision not to wait for someone else to save me, but to save myself, had made all the difference. The house behind me was lit, warm, full of life, my life. And though the path had been painful, though the scars would always remain, I was here. I was alive. I was free. And that, after everything, was all I needed. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.